What's up, everyone? Thanks to the success of my previous console settings guide to Dead by Daylight and it being outdated by a few years, I decided to go ahead and remake it. However, now I am on PC, so things will look a little different. I'll just skip over what you don't have on console and only focus on what you do have access to in the settings on console. However, all the consoles we have access to are the Switch One, Xbox One, and PlayStation 4. We do not have any new gen consoles, but there is maybe two settings that I know of that might be on the new gen that I'll cover, but for the most part, it should be basically the same thing. You'll just follow along going through your own settings and fix it up as needed. For starters, we have, you don't have language on console, any sort of language settings, but we have the tutorial. Obviously, it's just when you are loading into a match, the little, like when you get the little pictures and it shows like really basic looking stuff from like the tutorials, that's all low quality. Those are beginner tips. It's literally the same thing as what you cover in the tutorial. So if you just played the tutorial for the first time and you are doing your first few matches, you could maybe have it on just as a reminder from what you did in the tutorial. But other than that, you would want to turn it off. And then you will actually start getting slightly more advanced tips, so to say. Let's see, none of this matters unless you want to hide that you're online. This is the first part that really matters. So we have the scratch mark colors, which to sum it all up, Mintskull made a video about all the different scratch mark colors on YouTube, and I'll put a link to that below. So I won't go into super deep detail, but basically you will want to use red, hot pink, or cyan. Maybe on maps like Ormond or brighter or lighter colored maps, you might not want to use cyan and you might want to opt for red or pink. But for the most part, you will only want to stick with these three. All of these are either just inferior versions of these three, or they just are awful and do not show up at all. Or at least, like, they don't seem to almost like render in from a farther distance almost, it seems. They like blend in too well in the background from a distance. The next part we have first person FOV. Basically, you could up it to 103. It's good to up it at least some, but I upped it to 103 whenever I first back started playing on PC. And then over time, I slowly lowered it more and more. That way it wouldn't be too jarring of a change till I got down to about 100 for some sort of like middle ground. Uh, since the first person FOV changing does sort of change the exact direction that you will hear survivors from. Basically, it almost makes it like your camera is farther back than like where you actually are standing. So if someone's right behind you, they'll sound like they're right on you. If someone's farther away, they will sound closer than what they are, and it could really mess up with things. And now in the graphics tab, we get to the some of the more important. The only one that you'll have, I believe, is gamma. So you can basically, honestly, just up that all of the way, and you'll be able to see the difference for yourself anyways. But I can go ahead and show it real quick here. This is normal gamma, and then the one that I had set it to before and that I'm setting it to now is the max. And then on the new consoles, you might have access to quality settings. In the event that you do, you should put it on medium, because if you put it on low, it really messes with the render distance and the shadow quality. So medium would be a good middle ground for like performance, which Dead by Daylight will be optimized for whatever console or platform it's on. So you shouldn't really worry about that, at least with console. But I would probably go for medium to have a better render distance and shadow quality, because you can use people's shadows when they're rounding a wall of a tile. You might be able to see their shadow before you see them, and then you'll know. It basically works like the red stain, but you'll still be able to see even if they're moonwalking. And then you might have an FPS limit, since the Xbox and PlayStation new consoles do go up to 120. It would be best just to run it at 120, as long as your console doesn't get too hot and start stuttering from thermal throttling, which if that's the case, you just need to take it apart and clean off the dust more than likely. Maybe make other optimizations, or maybe something's just wrong with it. Maybe replace a part if that's at all possible. But the big thing is that you will need a monitor or TV that goes to 120 hertz. That will be the refresh rate. That will be how many times the display itself refreshes to show any new frames. And so if your hertz is at 60, the refresh rate is at 60, you only see half the frames that you're actually rendering. Now, it is still a good idea to up the FPS as high as you can, have it like pretty consistently at least, because it will reduce input lag, like sort of latency, but you will only be able to see the 60 frames. And so for that, you'll probably want to um, invest in a monitor. More than likely would be your best bet. A monitor that has 120, at least a 120 refresh rate. For the post processing, all you will have is the FSR and the FSR sharpness. I believe, I'm not entirely sure what it is by default, but if it's off, you'll basically want to turn it on. Wherever the meter is, you will want to lower it all the way to 0 and then turn it back off. Sometimes, you just, even if it's off but the scale is up, you will typically want to turn something on. That way you can adjust it and then make sure that it goes to 0 before turning it back off. There's some instances with, like, I don't know if it was OBS or Twitch, but I had to, even though I had an option off, I had to turn it on and lower the scale all the way and then turn it back off to make sure that there was no like baseline amount of that process or whatever happening. Even with it off, there was like a certain minimum of whatever this was. I don't even quite remember that it would do. And so that's what I had to do for that. I would recommend these should just stay at 100%. This one you should slowly lower until you get more and more used to it, to where you automatically notice what pictures are shown, what the different symbols mean and stuff. That way it just clears up less, or clears up more of your screen. Because as you can see, the difference of how much it covers on your screen when it's on 100% versus 70. Something that I did a long time ago and I really liked it. And then for the visibility, you pretty much want most of it off. That way it just doesn't cover up any of your screen. However, the important parts are the killer hook count, the score events, and the reason why I say score events is for sometimes there will be times where you go to do something and you're not entirely sure if it like worked, but you'll see the score event in the top right to know that it worked. The main example is when you're playing Plague and you're approaching a tile where you can see the very top of the gen's lights above the tile, and so you go to just do a quick little puke on the top of the lights to infect the gen. But maybe you're like, well, I don't really know if I infected it. I'm gonna just go and check. That's still a waste of time. You will see the object infection scoring event up in the top right, and so then you'll know. And then the show value of status effects, just having more details is good no matter what. And then the deep wound bar visibility, just to make it more obvious at exactly what state of the bleed out that you are in. Because honestly, with the changes now where the screen doesn't go black and white, there have been times, especially when I first started back playing since the change, that I forgot that I was even in deep wound because it wasn't black and white. And then I just die on a gen. So for the controls, I'm not going to go over the specific controls because I have it set up very specifically for me, and that will be personal preference. General tips will be for use L3 and R3 if at all possible. Use the bumpers for the most important things over the triggers because the triggers will have more input lag, physical input lag. And then if you do have to take your sticks off the thumbs, which you should try to set it up in a way that you don't, through like back buttons, even if it's a back button attachment that you have to plug in, Try to set up in a way where you don't have to take your thumbs off the triggers as much as possible. And if you do, they are the closest buttons to the stick, so you don't have to move it as far. And then if you use mouse and keyboard, since they have the support, I'll go over that a bit more in a second. For the controller sensitivity, it'll just be whatever you want. I would recommend a lower one, obviously, for killer since it's first person versus survivor. But I have mine set to 90 because when you play on mouse and keyboard, you can rebind the turn left to Q and turn right to E. It'll still be working with a mouse if you choose to use mouse and keyboard on console, but the keyboard buttons for turning will be controlled by the controller sensitivity. So if you want a consistent turn rate, you can just hold the Q or E to turn around, like for a billy curve or something, and you will be able to do that pretty consistently. But the 100 is honestly really fast, so I just lowered it a bit. Honestly, it could probably be lowered a little bit more even. And then for the mouse sensitivity, this one is important. You will need a mouse that you can change the DPI for. As you can see, I have different DPI settings. This is my survivor one. Now that's a really high DPI, way higher than anyone would ever need, unless in-game you set it to 0%. Because when you set it to 0%, then the sensitivity is only controlled by your DPI. And there was some things that I read online where lowering your in-game mouse sensitivity, that way you can up your DPI of the mouse itself even higher, could help reduce input latency. I'm not entirely sure. There seemed to be contention or debate on that, but it's the same thing. I mean, if you have your mouse sensitivity to 50, oh, if you have your mouse sensitivity to 50, and then you have like an 800 DPI, you could just like cut it in half and then multiply the DPI to like 1600, and it should be fairly equivalent. But I have it on 0 so I can use an even higher DPI just in case that is the case. And then there's interaction behavior. Now I have it on hold, and I think that the only interaction that this actually affects is kicking a gen. The reason why I have it on hold is because usually people think when you start the animation of kicking a gen that you are just going to finish the interaction. So if you approach a gen that's almost done, maybe you interrupted it, and then the survivor maybe hid along the backside of the tile or something, and you know that they had to have been there recently, but they're trying to stealth you out, and you don't want to waste their time looking for them. You can go to like literally fake like you're finishing the kick, and then quickly flip around and see if they started pre-running to the next tile, trying to take advantage of the interaction time. Yeah, that's it. And then we have the survivor. Of course, you can have a higher controller sensitivity. I think that would be a good idea. For the mouse sensitivity, you would want 0 again. If you can control it through the DPI, like what I just showed with the Glorious Gaming brand mouse app thingy, if you have access to some mouse software that you can download, or maybe it has a more hardware component for like switching and dialing in the DPI, or maybe you just have to like plug it into a PC or laptop, maybe go to the library, plug it in, set all the settings and the DPI profiles that you can switch between, and then bring it home. You can do that. For the interaction behavior, just toggle. That way it just happens. That way I don't have to hold it, because it's not as important as like a faster paced game where you typically want hold, because to do an action you would have to like press the button to start it and then press the button again to end it, versus holding, you just press in the button once, like you press it in, and then to stop you unpress. So that's just one action versus double for the toggle. But this just makes it so much easier to go hands free. It's definitely more up to you, more subjective which you choose. There was something I thought of saying for the toggle, but you guys can figure it out. I don't know. And then run to cancel. A lot of people say to have that off because it's messed up with some of their things. I've never noticed it mess up anything. Um, I honestly like it because at any point you can just hold down the sprint button and then move the left stick or move WASD to get right off the gen instead of having to press the interact button again, especially if the interact button isn't in a particular easier button to click, like you have to take your thumb off the left stick or the right stick, makes that much easier. And then for the audio, we got 100% main volume, menu music all the way down to 0. That's personal preference, but it just gets stuck in my head. There may still be an issue with having the headphones setting on. Used to, if you had the headphones setting on, it was worse. Even if you had headphones, it was worse. It was better to turn it off. I've seen some things, some people that still say to turn it off, but I don't really know if there's like actually an issue. If people haven't been like testing it or something, maybe, I don't know. But for now, I would just have it off. Maybe you could test it for yourself or try to find a more recent thread where someone discussed like, hey, they finally fixed it. We can now turn it on and it will be even better. I don't know. Then for accessibility, this is a huge one because a big goal of my video is to sort of bridge the gap between what PC players have available to them and the console players. And so the big thing is, well, not this, but the big thing's coming up. So for the blood web interaction behavior, press is just much quicker. Heartbeat visual support, have that on, even when you're not able to see your character model because you're like looking right behind you when you're on a gen. So the camera like zooms in because there's basically like a wall, so you can't clip your camera through it. You'll still see like a little haze right here in the center that will like show you if you're in the lullaby, or a heart will pop up when you're within like the terror radius, and then it will go up through the 3 stages of the terror radius where like, okay, they're 30 meters away, they're 16 meters away, they're 8 meters away, as it like speeds up and the heartbeat grows. And for the in-game text, just like the clearing up the screen, I just have the subtitles off. And then for the mode, this is the big one. You would want to up the intensity up to 100% so you can really see the difference between these. But I can just show again what the basic looks like. And then we can scroll through and see the others. Deuteranopia is probably the worst unless you actually have a specific color blindness that you would need to use one of these for. Deuteranopia is the worst, just kind of lowers the hue and vibrancy of every color. Almost kind of makes it look like it's all along the same color palette, sort of. I mean, I know I'm on just like Macmillan of all things, but still. Protanopia might be ever so slightly better than normal, but it kind of makes like the more vibrant reds turn into like a washed pink. So that is personally why I don't think that it is good or even better than normal. Tritanopia is really what you want to use. It makes reds more vibrant, darker. It makes certain colors almost seem to have more hue and vibrancy to them to where you can tell differences in shade. Which with tritanopia, however you say it, with that on, with the color intensity up to 100, and then the gamma raised to max or maybe almost max, you don't have to. If it feels like it's too washed out, you can lower it a bit. With both of those, that will help you get the sort of reshade or NVIDIA filter effect that PC players are able to get. So now with all that being said, I'm going to show some things that I think would help. I know on Xbox One, you have access to Dolby and DTS. That is a replacement for if you go to your audio settings. I don't think there's an option on PlayStation, just to interject that. But if you go to whatever audio you're using, you will see a spatial sound option in the sound settings on Xbox at least that look basically the same. And so you will have off or Windows Sonic by default. And then if you get DTS or Dolby, you will have those options. Those are better than using Windows Sonic. And typically you only want to turn something off if like Windows Sonic, if you don't have access to something that's not Windows Sonic and the game itself has really good spatial audio already, then you will want to turn it off. Otherwise, if you just want one selection, and you don't have to like worry about, well, does the game have good spatial audio? You just use DTS or Dolby. So in this case, I would recommend Dolby. Dolby is known to be a little bit more bassier than DTS, and bassier is always worse for games. Don't use any bass boost. Use open back headphones over closed back headphones. Use DTS over Dolby. Whatever non-bassier options you can use, the better. But with Dolby, you do have access to an equalizer, which was the only way I found to get an equalizer on Xbox One was through Dolby as opposed to DTS. And then DTS is like $5 or $10 more than Dolby, but it's a one-time purchase for both of them, for either of them. So, and then you'll be able to use it on any of your Microsoft devices. So if you get a PC and you install Windows, you'll be able to use Dolby still, or obviously if you get like a Dolby headset, I think you get it for free, at least for that headset. But you can get Dolby access. I've already done the free trial, so unfortunately I can't show you. But you will have a little simplified equalizer, and the general trend is to maybe lower the very bottom and the very top end of the frequencies, and then maybe give a sort of like, if you're playing killer, lower the bass, raise the treble so gens are easier to hear, survivor footsteps, groans, moans, the vaulting sound, the sound of them putting down items are easier to discern and differentiate between, and you'll be able to hear basically at a farther distance as well. You'll be able to hear the specific clicking from them working on the gen, so you know if there's someone actively on it at the time. Um, and so for that reason, I'm going to show a generalized equalizer that I use for killer. Oh, nope, not that. I'm tweaking it. This is what I use, sort of like lowering the bass, lowering the very top, which in this case is 20,000. You might not have one that high. And then for the treble, I would probably lower some of this more, some of this higher end bass, but your big focus will be in like between 2000 and the 5000 hertz. So basically, you will want to, for the equalizer that you get through Dolby, if you choose to get Dolby over DTS, is to basically raise the right side of the equalizer. So the larger numbers, the treble, raise that for killer, lower the bass so you can hear survivor footsteps, groans, grunts of pain, them setting down items, them slow vaulting, And for survivor, you'll want to raise the bass, maybe raise the lower end of the mid-range frequencies and raise the upper end of the bass frequencies. Like you wouldn't really want to raise the very low bass sounds because that stuff is typically only included in the ambient noises of the map. And then you will want to lower the treble so that way gens aren't as loud to you. You can hear over them easier. Your own footsteps, your own grunts of pain, your own screams, you can hear over them easier. And that's typically the general rule of thumb. I've been trying for the longest to find specific frequencies that specific sounds are at, and I have not been able to. The best I could find was that pretty much all the important sounds that you need to hear that aren't ambient go between 2500 and 5000 hertz. So you can just tweak those numbers, lower the lower end of that range, raise the higher end of that range for killer, and then reverse that, flip it, raise the lower end of that range around the 2500 and lower the higher end for survivor around 5000. And I wanted to include a little bit of like proof. I changed the in the game settings themselves, if you have a graphical preset, at least on the newer gen consoles, I changed the preset to low and it zeroed out all of my settings. You will want view distance and shadows to not be lowered all the way. And so for that, you will need to set it to medium as opposed to low. So now I'm going to cover controller specific things and TV and monitor specific things. So we already kind of talked about what you can do with like the mouse and the mouse software. Make sure you can get one that changes DPI to lower the mouse sensitivity all the way. That way you can control it all through the DPI. But if you're insistent on playing on controller, which is honestly better for survivor but worse for killer, the general rule of thumb is to get one with back buttons. That way you don't have to take your thumbs off the sticks as much. If there's a pulling rate, raise it up as high as it can go, just like the mouse, but do not go above 2000. So the pulling rates double. You can see 250, 500, 1000, they double. And 1000 is the typical highest for most like newer gaming hardware that isn't like gonna break the bank. But they can go to 2000, 4000, and 8000. And 8000 is way too high of a pulling rate. You will notice a lot of like sort of stuttering, almost like slowing down, speeding up, like it's not quite working right. Same with 4000. 2000 is usually the best and highest that you want to go. But I have read somewhere that DBD apparently doesn't work properly with a 2000 hertz pulling rate. So you'll want to test that for yourself. Same with your mouse and your controller. A 2000 hertz pulling rate, if it messes up in DBD, then just 1000, because that's basically the clicks per second that the controller and mouse are constantly reading for an input. So they will 1000 times per second, it will be reading for an input. And then if the input falls on that tick, then it will send it off to the machine and process process the action that you did and then send it off to the server. But the so sometimes, like especially with a lower lower pulling rate, actions that you do will kind of fall through the cracks and maybe not get registered immediately unless you like double tap. For the triggers, I like to lower the inner dead zone a lot and then lower the outer dead zone. That way it basically reaches max pressure, like 100% of the way down, just at 15% while I'm barely pressing it. That way it's much quicker to maybe activate whatever function the trigger has. So that way I don't have to spend as much time pressing it all the way down. So that way there's less like physical input delay. And then if you have anti-dead zones, it would be a good idea to raise the initial anti-dead zone a little bit, because then right when I meet the 2% of the dead zone, 2% of pressing it down, the first function it'll reach, or the first percentage, will be 18. It's hard to show it, but it does not go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. It immediately starts at 18 when it reaches the actuation point. For the max, if you were to lower that, you can probably hear me clicking the button. You literally cannot do any more. Even if you move it all the way, you will not move that fast with a stick, with the analog sticks, and you won't maybe potentially activate the action of the trigger, whatever it is in game. Or maybe if it's sort of like a scale, like the harder you press it, the like more it does, like the harder it breaks or the harder the gas goes in a car for like the racing games. For sticks, you'll have a similar concept. You will have a lower initial dead zone. For the left stick, you will have a lot lower. And then you will want to raise the anti-dead zone, the initial anti-dead zone, but not the maximum. That way, it only takes a little bit of movement and it already starts going pretty fast. And then you don't have to move the stick all the way to the edge. So you can like be moving one way without the stick, moving max distance without the stick being pressed all the way, so that when you let go to reset or to go the other direction, it's not as big of like a weight from having the stick all being all the way against the edge. That way you can kind of like strafe quicker, which is the big thing with FPS games, while some people prefer WASD controls because they can just press a button and it's immediate. They can immediately switch directions. So this kind of bridges the gap with that. For right stick, something similar, but you don't really want to mess with the anti-dead zone. You don't want as small of an inner dead zone. You don't want as small of an outer dead zone, since it is something that you are using to aim with. You'll want more precise control over it. And if you are on Xbox, I wanted to just give the general controller tips first for whatever controller you may have, however you may be able to fix it up. Maybe you have to plug it up to a PC to change the software for it and then plug it back into the console and use it. But if you are on Xbox, unfortunately, again, on Xbox, you can get a GameSir remote controller with one back button on each side, Hall effect sticks to either make it so that it's immune to stick drift or just really hard to get. I forget which. Download the software, the GameSir Nexus software, so that you can do all of this. So this is exactly what you will be seeing if you're on Xbox. So you can get a GameSir remote for, and it's like licensed, not licensed, maybe recognized by Xbox. It's like legit. You know, it's not just some off-brand controller. It's legit. Good back buttons, good quality. I'm not being sponsored, unfortunately. I'm a broke boy, but you will have access to downloading the software. You can occasionally go on and check it, make sure the firmware or basically drivers are up to date. And that's an option that you have on Xbox. You could probably find some alternative to the maybe the spatial audio that I was talking about and the controller mouse softwares that I was talking about for Xbox. Maybe find an alternative on PlayStation, or you might not be able to. The spatial audio is pretty good, anyways, on PlayStation, so I wouldn't really worry about that too much. But yeah, that is basically everything for the settings. How did I get over here? Oh yeah, from all the moving with this. Yeah. So that's everything for the video. I hope you enjoyed. Consider leaving a like, subscribing, and following. I do go live on Twitch. I am planning on getting back into making content more frequently. Um, there's a lot of video ideas that I have. There are some great videos out there, and I've watched basically every YouTube video about Dead by Daylight because I just don't have a life, but I just love the game so much. And so there's still some stuff that I haven't seen mentioned that I've heard of or found out for myself that I would like to make videos about. And so if you are interested in watching those, you can make sure to hit the bell icon. So that way you can be notified when I post. That way you can find it immediately. But other than that, all other social medias, Real Tyler here, same as YouTube. And I hope you have a wonderful day.